Good afternoon, everyone. Folk, can I get a show of hands of where everyone's from? If you're at this institution now studying, do you mind putting your hands up, please? Great, thank you. If you're lecturing here, of course you're studying as well still. Great. If you're if you're currently teaching, great. Thank you very much. Is there anyone else that hasn't put their hand up yet? Can I, and what are you doing, please?
Working on a project funded by the Federal Department of Education.
Fantastic. Well, great. Well, look, folk, what I'd like to do is share with you some experiences for about 45 minutes. And Wendy, keep me on task, please. Okay, and I've called it Principles that I've learned from Principles. Now, I need to start by saying I was a teacher of the blind, so I never had to perfect a whole lot of skills like using overhead projectors, etc.
It can be better than the one at Everton Park.
Sorry, Simon?
It can be better than the one at Everton Park.
Yes. We had all the principals in last year to do a really serious discussion about how our resourcing was changing, and we brought them in early, and so I think we had about 90 or 100 people, and they were there for 2 hours, and it took us an hour to actually get a projector that worked. So, and in the end it was actually my personal laptop that was very, very old. Folk, what I'd like to do for the next 50 minutes is share with you regarding some principles that I've picked up as I've operated for the last 44 years in education, and in particular in special education. And I want to talk about the context, and Mike, that's where you really got to pay attention, okay, because that's where some information will be. I want to talk about the need for us, whatever our role is, to be change agents. I want to talk about the need for us to be competent, and not only to be competent, but be prepared to share our competence. The need for cooperation, the need to be courageous, the need to be caring, the need to be curriculum-centred, and the need, again, I'm sorry, that the change managers is number 8. And I thought because this is an alumnus presentation, I do need to link it back to literature. And all of us, no matter what our role is, are going to be leaders. We're going to be leaders in our classroom. We're going to be leaders of schools. We may be leaders of projects. We may be leaders of systems. We may be leaders of professional associations. But it's important that we can identify what our leadership skills are. And recently, we put a significant amount of work into the research that's been done by Kouzes and Posner, or K&P as they're affectionately known. And these two gentlemen, with their teams, have researched leadership for the last 30 years. And these are the top 5. And what's interesting is that the top 5 qualities remain the same regardless of what generation of research they're doing. Their orders may change slightly, but number 1 quality for a leader is being honest. Number 2 is being forward-looking, being strategic, looking to know where you're leading your team. Number 3, the C word, the competent. Number 4, inspiring. And number 5, intelligent. Interesting, isn't it, that intelligence at number 5. So have a look at those, and I want you to talk with your neighbour if there's any surprises there. Like what I'm going to do to show that I just didn't, I can remember studying in this room. This is very, very historic. I studied in this room. There was a big, big bench. It was a science bench because my first lecture at Macrobat Teachers College was in fact in this room. I was in 1EF. There were 60 of us in the room. It was absolutely crowded. Rolls were taken. We had to wear long socks with garters. We weren't allowed to wear thongs, and jeans were unheard of. And the Dean of Women supervised us. She would stand at the bottom of the steps, God bless her, Betty Smith, and she would let us know whether or not our dress was acceptable as beginning teachers. And we came into the room and we signed on. You couldn't tick, you had to initial your name, and we were the first lot of the third year students. We were the first lot of teachers in the state of Queensland to be given a 3-year scholarship. And that was pretty exciting. So this room is very, very familiar to me. So, and what I want to do is point out that one of the first things that I learnt in this room from a lecturer called John Reddington, and I'll mention his name just in case people have been lucky enough to work with him, was Dr. Miller and the Power of 7. And your short-term memory people, you can remember 7 main things, plus or minus 2. So I'm sure you've all heard that, probably not with that accent, Charmaine. But what I wanted to point out is that I've got 7 Cs. So 4 of them I've taken from the K&P work, and we're talking about competent, we're talking about being cooperative, we're talking about being courageous, and we're talking about caring, and how this is really important for leaders, for teachers, for principals, right in this current era. Now I'll tell you a little bit about context, because I came to Mount Gravatt Teachers College, as Judith mentioned. We were the first of a 3-year compulsory group. We still had some students with us that were doing a 2-year course. They got a 2-year scholarship, and part of the way through they were given the option of going for another year, so that we had some of those that were in transition. We also had in our 3rd year a group of 4 people from the university, and they came from the University of Queensland because that was the only other university at that time. James Cook was just starting, and they had all got psych degrees. And Norm Hart, who was responsible for special education, believed that it would be really, really good to balance the enthusiasm of a group of special educators with people that had graduated from university. And we had a reunion last year, and all of those people are still involved in activities. Now from 1971 until 1993, so you want to work out how long that is on your hands. So for basically 23 academic years, people were given the opportunity not only to study special education as well as primary education, but in addition, if you were an experienced teacher, if you'd done 2 or more years teaching, you had the option of coming back to college or the CAE or then the university for 12 months on full pay to become a graduate in special education. So if you think about that, that was pretty amazing, that there were 120 teaching positions each year that were given to studying special education, to studying guidance in special education, remedial education and speech language impairment. And that was really the growth of special education. Now if you think about that, it was really giving the attitude to a whole lot of teachers that special education was different, that you needed different skills, and you do need different skills, you need different competencies, but complementary competencies. And I think one of the issues that we're still contending with today with a whole lot of teachers is the fact that you need to have special training to work with students with disabilities. And you need to have special training to work with students with disabilities in mainstream classes. And the reality is that it'd be fantastic if you had that, but you really need specialist training to work with any specific groups of students that we've got nowadays. As our teaching craft, as our pedagogy is becoming more sophisticated, we realise that the more value that we can add to the lives of young people, the better off we're going to be. So this is Peter. This is my first class, and there's and if you note, there's 7 students there. They're all visually impaired. In fact, all of them were braille users. Now, not all of them were blind, because one of the students, in fact, all of the students there are blind. They were totally blind. Jane, pretty unusual to get a cohort of students. But they're right around the state. Narberthon was the only school for the visually handicapped people. If in fact you're a parent of a child who was legally blind, you could be fined £2, later to be known as $4, if you didn't send your child to the Narberthon school, and equally to the school for the deaf. So a £2 fine, and the reality was that I had other children in my class too who, shame of shame, read Braille with their eyes. Now we can laugh about it now, and we felt pretty uncomfortable doing it at the time, and I can remember saying to one particular little girl, Serena, stop reading the Braille with your eyes, because we believed that she was going to lose her sight, and that it was best, because of the diagnosis that she had, that she would in fact go on and pick Braille up much, much easier. Now we know the research has really thrown that out, but it's an important reason why I am sure some of the practices that we are doing today, you're going to know in 40 years' time, probably aren't as correct as we believe that they could be in 2060. So we've always got to be inquiring. We've always got to go with our heart too, because the reality is I felt pretty uncomfortable saying to Serena, don't read the Braille with your eyes, use your fingers. But that was just something that we knew nothing any better about. So now what was really lovely was that last Friday there was an occasion for us to get together, and Karen, who's sitting on my left-hand side with the long socks with the garters, as you can see, is now a social worker. She's in fact an executive director of Vision Australia. And she got an OP, both Karen and Katrina, and this is really interesting from an inclusive sense. They did their first 7 years at Narberthon. There was no such a thing as early special education. After they finished their 7 years at Narberthon, they went to Cab Road High School, where they were part of the Cab Road unit, where a group of teachers from Narberthon were based and worked with the teachers at Cab Road. Now, both those students got the equivalent of OP1s. They got 990 TE scores. And they didn't get it because they were Braille, they got it because they were really, really bright girls. And last Friday at my retirement from the school, that the staff were saying lovely things. And Karen got up and Karen said, and she had to be pointed to where I was because she got up and had no idea where I was sitting, of course. She said, thank you for the many hours that we sat at the discovery table. And I thought, oh, what did we sit at the discovery table doing? And she said, just talking to us about things that were really important, because she said, you were the only person that ever told me it was important to look at a person's face via their voice when talking. Now, something as basic as that, and Wendy was talking about that this morning with an experience that she had, but telling a blind person, Jane, we've got to remember this is 40 years ago, to look at the person's voice. So important, and yet we've got to be able to say to them, look at a person's voice where you're hearing that it's coming from in a small group situation, but you don't want to do that in a public meeting because, of course, with amplification, we could find that blind people would be looking at speakers rather than looking at where they believe the speaker ought to be. So some really important issues. Now, Mike, here's the information. Unfortunately, because I'm not with the system now, I can't give you the current information, but I want to share with you this information. And this is pretty hard to come by. Why is it hard to come by? Because we don't publish this information. But in 1970, there were 55 special schools in the state. In 2014, there's 42. If we were to say, you can see in 1986, there were 88 special schools. Why were there 88 special schools, Wendy, in 1986? Really significant event.
That was because Endeavour Foundation schools were moving across.
21 schools from the Endeavour Foundation moved across. Now, the significance of that is that the state government, very much assisted by the Commonwealth Government, was able to offer education for all students. We can talk about the right of education for all students, but the reality was, in 1971, sitting in this room, studying special education, we didn't even look at students who had an IQ, because IQs determined everything. IQs, they were fixed. We knew that, they were, very, very powerful. But if you had an IQ below 75, you didn't exist as far as Education Queensland were concerned, because you were part of the Department of Health. So we now find that by 1990 we've got all students with disabilities in schools, and we've got a significant number. So if you have a look, we've got 3,900 students in 42 special schools. We've got 580 other programs. We've got 1,200 programs in the state, including government and non-government schools. We've got 580 of those that have got special education programs, and we've got 24,053 students in mainstream schools with highly specialised special education needs. So our context has changed, and can I suggest that it's going to continue to change? And we're going to see some of those issues as we progress. We must be agents of change. The reason that we've got to be agents of change is because we know that nothing is static. We are continually experiencing changes. I want you to share with your neighbour a couple of significant things that are happening right now in education. And let's see if you've got the same ones that I have. What are some of the significant things happening right now? Okay, folks, let's see how well we go. We all know Year 7 into high school making a massive impact. Anyone have anything else? Okay, well let's build on some of those things. Let's talk about competency. And I want us to talk for a little bit about instructional leadership. And I want to blow it out of the water because the reality is we've gone through an era where we're hearing that principals need to be the instructional leaders. Principals need to be working in their schools, significantly bringing about curriculum change. Well, I don't believe that's the best thing that principals can do. And Vivian Robinson talks about principals, the impact of school principals on school achievement. And she says the most significant thing that a principal can do is lead the learning and development program. Not getting in there and actually delivering it, letting other people follow, but leading the learning and development program. And if you think about that, if you think about your complex school, Simon Riley, and Simon's at Ipswich State High as the principal, if you think about how complex that school is, if you think about how complex your school is, Charmaine, if you think about how complex the school is that you were at doing your prac, where can principals make the most difference? And can I say that as a principal of a school that had a significant number of therapists working in it, the way that I could do the best thing for those teachers was to get in and take their class so they could have time to explore with the therapists other appropriate teaching strategies and methodologies. So that I think that we've got to ensure that we continue to be competent, that we continue to recognise that there are certain skills that people need. And Wendy shared before the skills of people learning Auslan, and the fact that she felt isolated. She was at a PD activity where everyone in the room except for her was communicating through Auslan. But Wendy's made great accommodations, and I'm so proud of you because she's going to take a notebook tomorrow so she can communicate with those people. But Auslan is a significant issue for the department. It's a significant issue for our community because we don't have enough role models who are competent. We don't have enough teaching role models or therapy role models or teacher aid role models who are as competent as parents. And parents are being very critical about that at present. Should they be? Too right they should be. Too right. We've got to make sure that we are competent. Jane, how many Braille using teachers would we have?
Teaching Braille or qualified to teach Braille?
Qualified teachers to teach Braille. How many do you reckon? We've got 65 roughly Braille using students. In the old days they were all at Narberthon or Cav Road. And parents would be fined $4 if the kids didn't go to those schools. Bottom line now is that they're in a whole lot of schools. And some people will say, well, you don't need Braille any longer. You can do speed reading. That is absolute garbage. We all know that we've got to be literate. It's a right to be literate. And we've got to ensure that we've got those skills. We've talked about, again, Fulham supporting the research about, are we an instructional leader or are we leading the learning that occurs in our school community? Goldman, there are many leaders, not just one. Leadership is distributed. We know that's the best style of leadership in a school. It resides not solely in the individual at the top, but in every person at entry level. Folk, who's going to be at entry level next year or this year or in a couple of years' time? It resides in every single one of us who one way or other acts as a leader. It is fantastic to have graduates of Griffith University in your school because they are coming out with the cutting edge information that they can share with others in your school community. So you've got an important role to play as leaders in passing on that new information. And Alma Harris, professional learning communities, a group of individuals working together in a disciplined and a collaborative way in order to improve learning outcomes. And that's so important for us working in our school communities because you can be working with one or two students that have got highly specialised needs, whatever those needs be, and you can believe that you're in isolation. You can believe that you're doing such a fantastic job that you're the guru in it. And we know that there's going to be other teachers somewhere, maybe in the region, maybe somewhere in the state, somewhere in Australia or somewhere internationally that will be working with similar students to you or similar methodologies. And it's your responsibility to find those and to share. Don't be in isolation. Don't believe that you've got all the answers because we know Serena Miller, don't use your eyes to read Braille. We know none of us have got those answers. The implication isn't that principals should abandon the focus on instruction, but rather that they should get at it by working with teachers individually and collectively to develop their professional capital. The press for continuous instructional improvement is central. And I want to acknowledge Belinda Russell and the great partnership that we've had with Griffith University and the Department of Education through Metropolitan Region, and Brendan, the fantastic support that we've had from Fiona McNamara in developing the Centre for Teacher Excellence in Special Education. And if you're not familiar with it, I know Belinda would love to share that information with you. But we talk about the responsibilities for learning communities, and I want to acknowledge how active Griffith has been in significant partnerships with DETE, and particularly with DETE in the Brisbane region, and the work that Wendy and Mike, Dennis and other colleagues have continued to do, the research that's being done in our schools. Judith, I go back to the big blue kit that went to every single government, non-government school in the late 1990s, and of course our most recent scholarships in teacher education. We cannot be too highly competent. We must continue to ensure we're at the top of our craft. Now, cooperating. This is building on the cooperation, and it's building on the competencies and saying that there's a need for us to go further. There's a need for us to interact with our community. There's a need for us to be able to share our professional capital. We can't afford to work alone. There is no way in the world that we can do that. And special educators must seek ideas from other schools. They must form partnerships with other schools, and they've got to make their contributions beyond their local fences, but on a global scale. And if I can share with you some of the work that's happening in intensive interaction. For some of our our young students and our older students who are very severely lacking in communication, some of the cutting edge research that's coming is absolutely superb. And the way, by using Skype, by using other networking, we're able to participate in worldwide research. And last year I was fortunate enough to be able to go at 6:45 one morning to Mount Omni Special School and present a whole lot of teachers that were Skyping with an English gentleman. It was Sunday evening his time, and was able to present them with a certificate that he recognised the work that was being done in that school was at the forefront of what was happening internationally. So absolutely fantastic. High-performing leaders, and remember we don't have to be a school principal to be a leader, high-performing leaders build teams, and they delegate their work and thereby find time to spend with parents, with teachers, with students, with community members, with school system leaders and other leaders inside and outside of education. These networks produce new ideas, they produce new practices and materials that can be effectively used to improve the results in their own schools. And again, there's a need for us, particularly if we look at our senior students, there's a need for us to look clearly at what are the job opportunities, what are the options post-school that our students are going into. For many of our students, we work with them from age 2. They'll have had 16 or 17 years of an education, whether it be compulsory or a non-formal early childhood developmental program with us. What is it that we're really preparing them for? And there's a whole lot of private providers out there that want to be able to work with us, but there's no answers. And the challenge comes from us interacting with academics, interacting with private providers, and experimenting so that we can get appropriate programs going. And I want to commend the work that's being done at Darling Point, where the principal of Darling Point, Charmaine, again, who's with us tonight and would be delighted to share over drinks with you some of the exciting work that is being done based on a program that is happening in Los Angeles. So it's great to see that we can be part of those networks. 40 years ago we couldn't be. Now it's a heck of a lot easier because of technology. It's certainly brought the world together and we're able to share our experiences at first hand. One of the other things that it's important to do is to be able to work across the districts, and if not solely with the districts, across other partnerships and find out what's happening. In each of the areas that you're probably going to be working in, you will realise that it is highly, highly specialised. And we can say you don't need any extra tricks really to work with students with disabilities. But can I say that when I go to my GP, when I've got a pain in the head and he tells me that I need a surgery, I'm really glad that I go to a brain specialist, that it's not the GP that's going to be operating on my headache, etc. And I think that we've got to be able to see ourselves in exactly the same light. And that while some parents may want their children to be in regular schools, and that is their right, it's up to us to ensure that those regular schools can access the skills and the specialists that they need to ensure that students are going to achieve to their highest success regardless of the educational program that they're in. And there's some real challenges for us. But we've got to remember, we could be saying now, oh yes, but not every school wants to take students with disabilities. Well, we know unfortunately that that's a fact. We know that we've got legislation that can prevent that, and we've seen that that's being used in Queensland on a number of occasions. But the important thing that we've really got to realise is that it's up to us, that we can creatively solve anything. And can I say, from 30 years being in the system doesn't want problems. The system wants answers. And there's creative responses that can be achieved very, very quickly by a group of people sitting together. And can I share with you an issue that we had in our region? We had a group of about 15 students that had all the secondary age that had significant communication and behavioural issues. They were social issues. They wouldn't be regarded as being eligible to be EAP, but they were certainly disadvantaged and they were certainly disabled in a non-EAP sense of that word. And so what do we do? We get a group of principals, a group of caring, courageous principals that sit with a group of policymakers and say, what can we do for these kids? Now, none of the principals wanted these students in their school, and the reason is that they've been expelled and suspended from every other high school locally, that their NAPLAN results were going to be absolutely dismal, so they would drive their results down. But a group of people got together, and can I acknowledge the work that Simon Riley did on behalf of our region in taking responsibility for these students. And again, a really, really creative solution, one that caused his school community a little bit of concern, but one that he was able to steer very, very well. So a courageous and caring gentleman, and that's a model that we could use in a whole lot of places. So it's not impossible. We've got to have solutions for these tasks. We know that every student has got the right to an education. It's up to us as educators to ensure that we can work out how we're going to deliver that program.
Peter,
Simon.
we now have 45 kids in 4 separate programs.
Okay, 45 students in 4 separate programs. All in this corridor, Simon, or is it extended further?
No, we've gone back to the old DSSU site
Right,
for the mob that we're dealing with on the south side.
Yep.
The other was at my school somewhere. Don't ask where.
These are big problem issues. They're problem issues for schools, they're problem issues for the community, because guess where they're probably likely to be if they're not at school? Outside your house or outside my house, causing trouble.
Or in your.
Or in my house.
Yeah, actually,
Or in
most
my
of them come
car.
from inside, that's
Right, the
right.
reality is, and
They
they're
don't
not,
hang around outside.
they're not simple, these students are not simple. They've got highly complex needs, but it's up to us to be able to work out responses. Okay, some of the areas where we've got to be cooperative. Staff and students, parents and carers, the wider school community, some of our disability-specific community groups, some of our other service providers, those in the system. Quite often it's our own colleagues in the system who've got specific responsibilities that can't see the wider picture. The unions, professional associations, and other school partners. I want you to talk to your neighbour again and see if you can identify where there's a need for cooperation, or where you're seeing cooperation in some of the projects that you're working on at present. Thanks very much, everyone, for that. That leads us into the next area. We've got to be courageous. There are times where we've just got to put our hand up, or we've got to stand up, or we've got to make our voice be heard. And it's important because for many of the students that we're working with, they can't do it themselves. And more importantly, for a significant number of the families of parents, of students that we're working with, the families can't do it either. I think one of the biggest shocks of working with students that have intellectual disabilities is recognising that many of them also have parents that have got intellectual disabilities, and how easy it is for some service providers to be able to manipulate the system to their advantage rather than the advantage of the student. So it's really important that we're courageous. We've got to look and identify the issues, and we've got to try and address the challenges. We've got to be prepared to take risks. We learn from risks. If we don't take risks, we're not really pushing the limit. We've got to have high expectations of our students and of ourselves. And that's really, really important. We've got to be prepared to give honest advice. And whatever we're doing, it's got to be based on evidence-based practice. And if it can't be based on evidence-based practice, well, we've got to get in there and make sure that it can, because we're going to contribute to that research. And that's something that can happen at a university. And it's something that I really believe we need to promote. We've got to be able to challenge, and we've got to be able to engage in constructive controversy. These are some of the issues that I thought were going to be take some courage. And I guess we could put up for a start Year 7 going into high school. Whistler, the whole school resource funding. And the fact that in the past, the system had allocated it to a region, and the region, knowing its individual schools and the nuances of those schools, would allocate it out to the schools. Well, this year it didn't happen that way. This year it went straight from the system to the schools. And what that's suggesting is that every school has got the same need. Oh, we've adjusted it slightly for educational need, but for our special educators, this is a real challenge. For the one braille using student who's in Year 2 or Year 1, who's going to need orientation and mobility, who's going to need braille instruction, who's going to need braille books, who's still going to need to be able to type, who's going to need basic word processing skills, etc., on top of the regular Year 1 and Year 2 program, that's going to be a whole lot of extra costs to that school. And guess what? If it's a primary school, the reality may well be that the school doesn't even realise it. The mum turns up, the dad turns up with little Jimmy, and Jimmy's accepted into the school, and the school wants to do the right thing. And yes, Jimmy's no trouble at all. Jimmy's a model student. But in Year 3 and Year 4, when the instrumental music program starts and the language program starts, Jimmy's needs are going to go astronomical again. And guess what? Individual schools are going to have to pay for that. So there's some issues that we're going to have to work with. NDIS, parents buying the services. Parents being used to buying the service, and we don't know what that's going to mean in schools, but we've started to see parents saying, no, I don't want that teacher aide working with my child in that class, I want the other teacher aide. And we're having to say, well, look, I'm sorry, you don't get your choice. Just as you don't get a choice with the teacher, you don't get a choice with your teacher aide. But it's pretty hard to say that when you think, yes, well really, if that child were my child, I'd want that teacher aide too, because that teacher aide is more highly skilled in this particular area. So again, what's the challenge there? Getting more teacher aides highly skilled in very, very specialised areas. Private providers operating in schools. Some of the issues that brings. Now we've had them operating in schools for a very, very long time. But again, just the same as the resourcing levels have changed and schools are now getting the resources, I wonder what the impact would be if the Commonwealth gave the $3 million that currently is given directly from the government to some of the larger charity organisations such as the Subnormal Children's, the CP League, the Preschool Association for the Deaf, for those resources to go to schools where schools were to buy in those services. Would be very, very interesting to see. The challenges faced by early special education. Will in fact we have the responsibility of providing early special education programs in the future? Or, because education starts at prep, will we too start education at the year in which the child turns 5? What constitutes a quality educational program? How do you know what's a quality educational program for the students working in your school? Do we measure it by NAPLAN? Some people perhaps might think we do. I guess another issue that's really going to hit us is the use of technology. As more and more students are encouraged to bring their own devices, how in fact are we going to be able to support that? We've got a really specific issue at present. We've got the Royal New South Wales Institute for the Blind teaching Braille to a student in a mainstream school. The Institute has been doing that for a number of years, The institute charges the parents or charge the department $7,000. $7,000 to teach Braille for a year. Okay, it's 30 hours of teacher aid time. 300 hours of teacher aid time. Okay, a term of teacher aid time to teach Braille. You work that out. Very, very cost effective. And they teach via Skype. Again, very, very cost effective. But guess what? Those of you working in departmental schools, Skype can't operate with the operating system that the department uses. So the child's got to go next door, out of the environment, to be, or use Dad's laptop to be able to learn some of those basic issues. So again, some challenges. We can be creative, we can problem solve. Now, caring. School leaders set the ethos that either welcomes or disables disabled children. Not my reference, the Lamb Inquiry from the UK. You'll find that offensive, I think, now, Wendy. And children with special ed needs. And they create a culture where parents are either confident to engage with the school or feel that they're a nuisance. Now, we know that. We know that leadership is tough enough to demand a great deal from everyone, but it's also tender enough to encourage the heart. And I think we've got to get that balance. We've got to be able to say, yes, we recognise that the teacher aid X is probably the better teacher to work with your child, but at this time we just can't do it. Or we don't want to ask teacher aid X or teacher X to do it again because the teacher's done it for the last 2 years. It's time for a change. One of the things that I think we've got to, if we look at ourselves, if we stand in front of the mirror, are we passionate or are we zealous? And in the last couple of years when I was in a regional position and we had deputations from a number of people, I really felt that perhaps their passionate had become zealous. That there's a really, really thin line, and we all talk about the very thin line, Wendy saying, yeah. And I don't know where it is, but I can tell you when it occurs, and I think we've got to watch that. I think we've got to be really, really careful that because every teacher's concerned about the education of their children. Every teacher will tell you that. 98, 97% of them really mean that. And what we've got to watch is that we recognise that the additional work that we're expecting of teachers or the additional work that we're putting on ourselves has got to be measured. That we're in for the long haul, we're not just in for a quick fix. So, and it's important that we follow our passion with mastery. That we're not just passionate about it, but we continue to find out what really makes this child click. What is it? What are the secrets that we need to be able to fully engage that child? So our mastery is so important. Skills trump passion in the quest for work that you love. And the more we learn, the more skilled we become, and then of course, the more passionate. Now this is a really nice quote, and I don't know who made this quote, but I'm not sure if you're aware that as part of the More Support for Students with Disabilities Commonwealth Initiative, just about, I think 98% of principals in the state of Queensland in 2013 and 2014 did a PD activity involving Loretta Giacelli. Professor Giacelli, again a graduate of Mount Gravatt Teachers College. She was 4 years ahead of me. So she actually came across, she did her final years at Mount Gravatt. And this is what one of the principals said. I've got a feeling I might know who the person is. We must meet the needs of each student in the school. If we're not the best educational setting for him or her, then perhaps he or she shouldn't be here. Okay, now we can accept that. And then they say, but once he or she is here, we have the responsibility to provide the best education possible. And I just want to support that. I think we've got to be courageous. We've got to be able to say, for some students, maybe the best educational setting isn't their local school. It might be another local school that's not as local, or it might be a different school altogether. But we've got to have that discussion with parents. We've got to have that discussion with the carers. But the reality is, the moment that the parents or the carers have made up their mind that this is the school that the student's at, it's up to us to give the best education possible. And that is going to be a challenge for the next 40 years, for the next 100 years, the best education possible for every student that we're working with. Isn't it terrible when your button doesn't work? Now, I want to take you back to Peter, teacher of the blind, with his group of kids. And we know that the teacher is the most important person that makes an impact on student learning, and the principal is second to the teacher. So it's really important that we can support the teachers, or if we are teachers, that we're prepared to take the lead and recognise what that means. Now, can I just say, and these, I hope they're not controversial to anyone, but we had a Director General who said that DETE would follow the Australian curriculum. And we have followed the Australian curriculum as a system. We've done the very, very best that we can. In order to follow the Australian curriculum, there were demonstration lessons written, and they were known as Scribbly Gum, I think. And then they went on to become known as C2C. But the reality is, for students with disabilities, for any student at all, the Australian curriculum was only 80% of their learnings. There was still 20% of learnings that schools and teachers could develop for themselves. And it's that 20% that I think we've got to focus on as special educators. Now, for goodness sake, we all know about autism, and we all know the impact, and we know when I was here in 1971, we didn't know about autism. There was an autism centre, and I can remember in 1972, we raised $3,000. We gave $1,500 to the Autistic Centre at Sunnybank, and we gave $1,500 to Radford House. Again, two groups that we had nothing to do with educationally, and that was one of the reasons that we did, because they were still supporting students who weren't involved in state education. It was really interesting because we were selected to do special education in our second year in 1972, and the Student Union Executive, I was the president. We ended up with the treasurer and the secretary also out of the special ed group. So there were 10 of us on the executive, but 3 of us were in fact 4 of us were from special education. So we certainly influenced that group. But it's the 20% of the disability-specific curriculum that we need to focus on. And we know if you've got an intellectual disability, that part of the issue is going to be your adaptive behaviour. And we know that we've got to work on that adaptive behaviour. And we know that that's not going to be found in C2C as such. We know if we're a student who is on the autism spectrum disorder, we're going to have some social issues, we're going to have some communication issues. And again, we might be able to backward map it and say, oh yes, well it fits into English here and studies of society here, but we really need some solid teaching. And we need that solid teaching whether we're one student in a secondary school by themselves, a group of students in a special ed program in a mainstream school, or a group of students in a special school. And it's important that we don't forget that. Really, really critical. And it's important again that we don't reinvent the wheel, that we share our work. We confuse our teaching strategies with curriculum content. And we talk about, oh yes, well we teach conductive education, or we teach intensive interaction. The reality is we teach students, we teach a whole lot of different learning outcomes, and we use a whole lot of different teaching strategies and methodologies. And quite often we confuse all of those. And you've got to become a master at all of those areas to be able to really make an impact for our students. And I want to leave with you very, very easy to say, oh, NAPLAN's no good for students with disabilities, or NAPLAN really doesn't adequately reflect the learning outcomes of our students. Well, if it doesn't, what's a better tool? And what's a better tool that we can use in Australia with all the special educators to say, let's look at measuring student outcomes. We know we make great gains for our students. We can measure it in their ILPs or their IEPs or their negotiated curriculum plans or their ICPs or whatever the day of the week it is, whatever we want to call it. But the reality is, can we come up with a better tool? Folk, we have had some real wins. For a start, since 40 years ago, we've got all kids now in an educational program that the state must provide for. And the More Support for Students with Disabilities initiative that's just about to run out was fantastic. It was a national initiative. Why did we get it? Because the Commonwealth believed it was needed? No. You know why we got it? Because the Principals Association, the Special Education Principals Association of Australia, lobbied with the Secondary Principals Association, the Commonwealth Minister. There were specific monies that went into some secondary schools for literacy and numeracy, that went into primary schools, and the special school principals collectively at an Australian level said, don't give it to special schools, the bulk of the kids are in mainstream schools, bring in a program to skill every teacher about working with students with disabilities. Now folk, that's happened once, it needs to continue. The ice has been broken, it needs to continue. 98%, Simon, I'm looking, the target was 98% of every principal in a state school would have done a quality school inclusive leader program. And I believe that that was pretty close to being met.
It doesn't mean they've adopted it.
Sorry?
It doesn't mean they've adopted it.
No, it doesn't mean they've adopted it, but at least we've started. We've started a slow walk. Now, Brendan, I didn't know that you were going to be here, but can I just say, this is Cody. Cody was from my school, and Cody would chase his shadow every lunchtime. And Cody loved reading the teacher's journal. I don't know if it was the texture of the page, I don't know if it was the stimulation that we got, but I thought that was pretty special. So I want to say, as teachers, it's our responsibility to inspire, to challenge, to motivate, to ignite a lifelong love of learning so that students can follow their dreams as independently as they possibly can. So for educational leaders, we need to be highly skilled, we need to be change agents, we need to build the capacity of others in our school communities in a disciplined and a collaborative manner where we can cooperate with other schools, we can feel competent in education and our speciality, and that we can be honest, courageous and caring so that Cody and every other student can follow their dreams. So when you're doing finger painting,